I did two 18-foot-long paintings. One was Western monotheism and one was Eastern religion. So the Western monotheism was Judaism on the left because it's the oldest, Christianity, and then Islam, right? And then the Eastern religions was Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. What I was interested in doing was I was sort of interested in finding the center. Okay, because I had worked with the concept of the center and the mandala, and I thought, how do other religions work with the center? It's so crucial. It's the center of the human being as well as we kind of think we're the center of the world. And, it can go on and on. I looked into Judaism and I found certain centers that had to do with images that I found as Torah covers. One was a sort of a flower image that is really the 7 days of the calendar, which is the one I ended up using.
That was Emily Cheng talking about the song Unwrapping Heaven, which I wrote after being inspired by Psalm 104. I'm Shep Rosenman. This is The Rest is Commentary, where we explore what songs inspired by the Psalms or Tehillim inspire in my guests. Emily is an artist, professor, and curator whose radiantly colored, often circular paintings have been shown nationally and internationally, with over 50 solo exhibitions, including major museum shows in the U.S., China, Taiwan, and the Philippines. She received her BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design, continued her studies at the New York Studio School, and teaches Asian art history and studio art at the School of Visual Arts in New York. She has also taught at NYU, CalArts, Rhode Island School of Design, Cooper Union, and other leading institutions, and divides her time between New York and Vienna. Emily serves as chair of the board of IIRR, the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction, which partners with rural communities in Africa and Asia to build climate-resilient livelihoods, strengthen local food systems, and support sustainable development from the ground up. You can learn more about Emily's art at emilycheng.com. That's Emily, E-M-I-L-Y, Cheng, C-H-E-N-G.com. And about her work with rural communities at IIRR.org. In this episode, we discuss grandness and granularity, the historicity and accuracy of the Bible, the Tao Te Ching, how we perceive music and fine art, letting your brain go, expanding your world through service, connecting to the earth simply by breathing, and so much more. Let's start off by listening to Unwrapping Heaven.
The seasons, time set by the sun. I don't know the reasons, but I know you are the one. I'm at 6s and 7s. I am a curtain of smoke. Face when I beckon, you're teasing practical jokes, unwrapping the heavens tonight, unwrapping the heavens tonight, unwrapping the heavens this very night, unwrap heaven with you each night, day and night. Tonight's wine is singing. Our hearts still have fun. Our lips are still clinging, yes, because you are the one. Wrapped in a blanket, the heavens tonight. Unwrapping the heavens tonight. Unwrapping the heavens this very night. Unwrap heaven with you each night, day and night.
Hello, it's great to see you. I saw you a few months ago, but then there was a few months of gap, a few years of gap between that time and the prior time we saw you. So it's great that I'm seeing you so much more quickly this time. Thank you.
We're watching each other age.
Every second. So I've written these songs inspired by the Psalms, and to me, each one is a gift, and you want to pay it forward. So I offer this gift to you in hopes that it inspires something in you. Remember, we don't always have to love our gifts. We can love them, we can hate them, we can have questions, we can have curiosities. In offering this gift to you, what did it inspire?
You know, I heard it the first time when you sent it and I loved it. I heard it again twice today and I still love it. So that's a really good sign. I was trying to think, because when I teach painting, I always try to get my students to articulate the whys. Why do you love it? Because it's not good enough to just say, I love it, right? So here I am saying, I love it. But I did make some notes. And I was thinking a lot about this was really one of the first times that I really listened a little bit more closely to the lyrics because I knew how important they were to you. I have gone through most of pop music with hearing partial lyrics. I'm not a lyrics person, just like I'm not a numbers person. My husband will say, oh, did you hear? And then he said this. I look at him like, are you a Martian? What happened? Because I have no idea what he's talking about. And then I'll go and listen to these words and I'm like, wow, that's kind of interesting. It's really, David Bowie did a song about, you may know this song about being alone in a spaceship.
Sure.
And he's dying, right? And when I actually listened to the lyrics, I was like practically sobbing,
I'm not a first-time lyric listener either. The first thing I look for is the groove, the emotion, the feeling that comes out of the song. And it's only in my kind of second passing or third sometimes where I really kind of break it down. Mm-hmm. And then there's the process where Bowie's a great one. There are some songs where had I not gone to the album lining and looked at the lyrics, I would have had no clue what he was saying.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So having that tool available to you helps you kind of reintegrate the pieces.
I think that if you were to talk about the difference between the music and the lyrics enter your brain on a very intellectual level. The music goes right to your heart. Mm. And so you are functioning on two different planes.
Right.
And I find the instrumental and the layering that you have in this Unwrapping Heaven is very moving. I think that there's a grandness. And I was thinking, so what constitutes grandness? Because I understand that you're inspired by Genesis, and that I don't think there's anything grander than that. Well, maybe there is, because Genesis is about the origin of this world, but maybe the origin of the universe is grander. And universes beyond. So, and then I was like taking in the layering of the music and the instrumental, right? The layering of the instrumentals. And then your voice came in and you have a beautiful, resonant, deep voice. And then there were a couple of words that I hung on to, words like moons and heavens. And when it got more personal, like then all of a sudden, the space changed, right? It became very local.
Yeah.
So that's a fascinating process. And tonight's wine is singing. So, those kinds of things are really about the present. You jump from sort of eternal time to one that's very local and present.
Right.
And that's fascinating.
There's so much I already want to cover with you. First of all, how does this connect to how one creates art, fine art like you do? And how does it connect in terms of the experience? Those two questions. And the third one is, in the kind of more modern world, you see fine artists and painters doing sculpture in the moment with an audience in front of them, but it is not the normal modality. Painters are in their studios and they're painting, and then they present the painting to the world, often, maybe even usually on a wall in a gallery or a museum. Whereas with music, sometimes it's on the radio, and sometimes there's this third layer of how the performer delivers the song in the moment. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how all these things tie in together.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer three first. You think that every gallery is the same, but sometimes you're on a crappy wall. Sometimes you're next to the fire door and there's a red fire hydrant sort of taking your eye away. So these are things that you have no control over, and they are unfortunate. In that way, I think that it's not that different from music. But
sure.
the experience, like you may punch out a bunch of lines on the piano, and then you write it, and then you think like, oh, I don't need this. I really want to extend that, and then you layer it, right? And that's kind of what I do in painting. I backtrack. So, I was watching a movie of myself painting. That's a woman who made a short movie with 3 artists. And the particular part, that she was shooting me, I was drawing a line with a very fine liner paintbrush. And the line sometimes it comes out just perfectly, and people can't imagine how I can do that line. And other times, if I've had too much caffeine or if I'm, a little nervous, like the line shakes a little bit. Anyway, in this instance, it looked horrible. There it was. But what they don't see is that I have a way of cleaning up the line, and I have a way of going back, and, just like you have a way of editing your music. So the editing process, which is the process that is really the difference between a work of art that's not very well articulated and a work of art that's genius, is really the editing, right?
Yeah.
And so that editing process is something that we do behind the scenes that other people aren't privy to. And the ones that make sculptures in front of people are performers.
Right.
There is a movie of Picasso. He's painting for a movie camera, but he's painting on glass. Okay, so the camera is behind, see through the glass and seeing through to see him. Now that never happens, right? Because artists don't work on glass, and Picasso didn't work on glass. So at the end of the painting, because it was so contrived, he just wipes it all down. As he should. And that to me was about the integrity of what he just did.
When we first met, I was playing in bands, Alphabet City for rehearsal, then kind of downtown to play in a local club, get home at 3 a.m., be at work by 8 the next morning, and start the cycle again.
Wow.
But that was downtown life in New York in the late 80s and 90s. Now I probably could do it, but, I want some more sleep.
Yeah.
What's changed for me is that I took a break from live performance, and I found in recent years that I had a hard time committing to it again. There was a lot of fear around live performance, and it's a whole other art. Like sitting here and recording things in my studio, I could do that till the cows come home. I would be happy to do it and never publicize my stuff because I'm happy just writing. Like that's good enough. It is friends who have encouraged me. And in particular, this thing that I just came back from a week and a half ago, Song School, where the songwriters and performers are all saying, you know what, you never know whom your music will help, whom your music will heal, whom your music will inspire, because there's only one you, and you have to find a way to get that across. The same is true in art, in poetry, in all these other things. And so you're catching me at this moment in a journey where I'm already kind of doing the work of getting the music out there. And now I'm just starting the work of getting performance out there. And the Picasso story is what connected that particular dot for me, because when you're performing, you only get the one shot to connect with your audience. And that connects back to what you opened with, which is, okay, people will hear moon, they'll hear heavens. And it's conceivable that when I'm talking about moon and heavens, they're like, ooh, this is a beautiful celestial grand song. And then when I'm talking about UTs with practical jokes, they're like, huh? You lost me. And then they're out. Now, I don't know how I would perform this song with just me and a guitar, but that's a whole other conversation. I'm curious about when you heard the move from the celestial to the personal, was that a distraction for you, or was that like, ooh, connective in some way?
It's a little bit of a distraction only because I'm a weirdo. I am obsessed about I'm obsessed about big things. Okay. So like I'm at a point in my life where I'm really upset by division, and I'm not a Chinese American or an Asian American. I'm a human being. And if we all thought more like that, we could get a lot more accomplished.
Amen.
Positive. Yeah.
Amen.
That's the big overriding theme that I have. In a way, it's like, I don't really care about your life. I don't really care what gender you want to glove with, or that you want to marry, or you want to become. It doesn't matter to me. You're still a human being. I accept you for that. Don't make a big issue about it.
Right.
And I find that the dialogue is going more and more to the small. I think for a number of reasons. I haven't really put my finger on the definitive reason, but I think one of the reasons, is the mediums like TikTok and Instagram. They are like, what's really funny, if you really go and look at what gets thousands and tens and thousands of likes, right? Those are oftentimes, it's like the puppy that does something really funny. Okay, I like a good laugh also, but the dialogue is shrinking because that way you don't have to really think about the big things. We have a disappearing middle class. But if you're on your devices 4 hours a day, you probably don't have a lot to think about in terms of the shrinking middle class. And you certainly don't have the will to make any changes or, to do anything about.
I think that there's a deep connection between music and art in this space. They're both supposed to impact you. You have an emotional reaction. You have an intellectual reaction. You already articulated that dichotomy. And sometimes you have something that's both and combined. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, when you have these experiences, listening to music, seeing a statue, going to a play, seeing fine art painting. I remember being so powerfully impacted by a painting in, I think it's the Rijksstad Museum in Amsterdam. It was just this big blue thing. And I got very emotional. And then as I got closer, like my brain kicked in, I'm like, oh, that's what it's made of. And I had a story to the experience.
Was it Yves Klein? Yves Klein?
I think so.
Like body printing, where they were bodies printing, bodies covered in blue paint that were printing onto the canvas.
I think so. I think that's right. It's been, I don't know, about since 2007 since I saw it, but the sense memory sticks with me. And that's what we want. We want people to have a reaction, whether it's head or heart or both. In Hebrew, the Passover Seder, we go through this whole litany of things. If God had just taken us out of Egypt, that would have been enough. If God had let us cross the sea, that would have been enough. So the Hebrew for that is dayenu. Like dayenu, you impact someone to have the emotional experience. How much more so is it powerful when your art or music or writing, whatever it is, gets you to the next level and moves people to action?
With your song, when I continue to listen to it, the lyrics will become more present. That will happen, that will happen naturally. And I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just allowing different kinds of information in at different times. So that's something to remember. Just like in my painting, I don't paint paintings for people to look at for a second and then walk away. I make paintings for people, including myself, to look at over and over and over again. And then one day walk through the room and say, oh, I never saw that before. And these are the things that make it really worthwhile, right?
For sure.
So the duration.
It's brain candy, it's heart candy, it's eye candy and ear candy. For me, songwriting is a puzzle. In preparation for this, I went back to see how it came together. And it's just fascinating. What's fascinating is that it started with me mumbling into my voice recorder the words, with a melody that did not make its way into the song. I saw you standing up on a hillside. When I saw you weeping, you wept over the moon. And that begat mind mapping and all sorts of writing and diving into various Psalms until I found one that I think fit the spirit of that particular moment. And one of the things I do is, as I'm writing, I will, on top of the verse or the chorus or the bridge or just below it, I'll write summary or point, because I have all these words, they move me, but what am I trying to say?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think that the larger the thought, the concept, whatever it is you're dealing with, the larger it is, the less vocabulary you have to go with it. So,
Mm.
so you're talking about the relationship between another person or a sensory experience, or, the wine, or all of those things has to do with your world, your life, and the things that you can put words to. If I were to say to you, how would you describe the world outside our world? You would probably like lather. you know, I mean, anybody would, right? Because it's something that our imagination has to work really hard at accessing. So that's why I think that, okay, so Hans Zimmer, right? Because, I like him. He has no words.
Yeah.
And so, when he creates a space, you're creating an image to go with that space, but it has nothing to do with this world, and it has nothing to do with any world. It's the world that you're creating in your mind, and your mind is expanding with the music.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think he would be able to put words to it. I mean, luckily, he's making soundtracks for movies, so the image is going to take off. You've got words, image, sound, and feel, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have to take feel out of movies, because that's never going to happen. So then you're left with those, smell, right? You're left with those three. And, they've all got to be mitigated, right?
Sure. From the grand to the granular, you talked about the connection to Genesis, which is for sure there. You made a distinction between the difference in creating this world versus creating the universe. I think the Jewish theology, the Jewish kind of, I shouldn't say because there are probably 1,000 or 1,000,000 different Jewish perspectives on this. But the kind of traditional Jewish worldview is that when God created this world, God created the rest of it, all at the same time. And it connects me back to this distinction between grand and granular, because in that breath, because again, according to Jewish tradition, God created the world with speech, including breath. In that moment, God is creating both the grand and the granular. When we experience art, aren't we experiencing, or music, aren't we experiencing the same thing? There's the large impact from the piece in front of you, and then there's the deeply personal experience you're having in the moment, and or noticing that it's bodies that were doing the blue painting, which you might not have realized at first. Is that an element of the experience?
I think I know what you're saying, but I'm not exactly sure. Yes, there's going to be a time dimension, right? But going back to the Jewish idea of how the world was created, I don't know about you, but I grew up thinking that the story of the Bible was not very likely. And so, you can tell me anything about what was written, or, in the Old Testament or whatever. And I don't know, I was born with this mind that said, okay, that's what you want to think. But in my mind, I just dug my heels in and I said, this is highly unlikely. And I don't buy it, but I may not tell you.
Did that create issues with you in friendships or family because you had a different perspective than others? Or did everyone have that perspective?
My parents were brought up by Christian missionaries, but they both renounced Christianity when they moved to the States, and they met each other. I mean, they met each other after they moved to the States. So they both came with a perspective of not wanting to be Christian. But
Hmm.
my father always said he was an atheist, and my mother always said she was an agnostic.
Interesting.
And I would say to my mother, I said once to my mother, Mom, do we believe in God? And she said, your father and I do not, but you can do what you wish.
Mm.
And that made me very interested in world religions and understanding what the different perspectives were with religion. And I did this whole exhibition. I don't know if we talked about that or not. I did this whole exhibition on world religions. It took me a year to make. It was at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Taipei. And it was one of the most fascinating projects I've ever worked on. So I did deep research, and I was sorry that I only had a year to prepare for the show because I felt like I really could have been in this subject
Mm.
for 5, 10 years,
Right.
Oh, we
Sure.
have a show scheduled next decade. No, but I had to it was the year I didn't socialize. I went out one day a week, just a Saturday night. That's the only time I ever went out. I woke up I started working at 10 and I finished at 10 at night, pretty much. And
Mm.
and did that for almost a year, a little bit short of a year. I did two 18-foot long paintings. One was Western monotheism and one was Eastern religion. So the Western monotheism was Judaism on the left because it's the oldest, Christianity, and then Islam, right? And then the Eastern religions was Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. What I was interested in doing was I was sort of interested in finding the center. Okay, because I had worked with the concept of the center and the mandala, and I thought, how do other religions work with the center? It's so crucial. It's the center of the human being as well as we kind of think we're the center of the world. And, it can go on and on. I looked into Judaism and I found certain centers that had to do with images that I found as Torah covers. One was a sort of a flower image that is really the 7 days of the calendar, which is the one I ended up using. And Christianity, you have the center of the monstrance. So the dominant image is the cross. And
Hmm.
then in Islam, there really isn't so much. I did double two Torahs to make a circle, and that was a little bit cheating. But
Ah,
but because the Torah is a half moon anyway, it's like this.
right.
I thought I could do that. And then in Hindu, it was very present. In Buddhism, it's very present. And in Taoism, it was pretty present too. And then I did two 14-foot paintings tracking the religions of groups. Okay, Judaism was really easy because you've got the main branches of either Orthodox or of Reform. And then I could take it out now and look at it while I'm talking to you, but then you get into the Hasidic groups, and they splintered to not a million,
Yeah.
a bunch of little groups depending on where they were in Eastern Europe,
Right.
right? And that each one has its different kind of a hat. I mean, it was so interesting. While I was making the paintings, I was listening to tapes on each religion, and I tried to get them to correspond to the religions that I was working on. I learned a lot about the religions themselves and the institution of the religions. But after that exhibition, I gradually sort of moved to Taoism because I felt that Taoism was the largest religion. Many people don't even consider it a religion. I mean, they do because it's been institutionalized. But Taoism talks about the 10,000 things, which is really the universe.
Hmm.
And it talks about the energy, the flow, which is all about what we're finding out in particle physics. So,
Yeah.
it's so cool that 300 years before Christ, this was a theory that we are now proving with these labs in CERN and, whatnot.
Mm.
I have continued to study. Actually, I'll tell you a very funny story. I wanted to read the Tao Te Ching. You probably read it because it's so short, right?
I did. I also read the Tao of Pooh and the Day of Piglet.
I didn't like the Tao of Pooh, but I used to bring the Tao Te Ching with me to every trip because I thought this is the lightest book I can pack, and it's probably the deepest book I could pack. So I brought it, but I am severely poetically challenged by just a basket case when it comes to metaphors and things like that. I'm very, so I didn't understand how to unpack this information until I watched three people give their interpretation of one or two chapters in the Tao, and there were three interpretations depending on who was translating.
Mm.
So then I thought, I'm going to start a Taoist reading group. And who was in my Taoist reading group? There was one Chinese and everybody else was Jewish. Okay. Yeah. So it was like Emily and the Jews were studying Taoism. And it's like so interesting. One person came with a Buddhist perspective. Another one came with, he had taken 2 years to read the Torah with a rabbi. And then a woman who came with kind of a Reform Jew who was still going to all the holidays and taking the holidays very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very interesting intersection of Judaism and Taoism.
One of the reasons why I related to it, I mean, I started with the Tao of Pooh and then moved to the Day of Piglet and then went to the source itself after that. But one of the reasons why I really related to it is because I think the overlaps between Taoism and Judaism and Buddhism and Judaism and even Hinduism and Judaism are tremendous. I mean, when you talk about the center, I mean, in some of these religions, depending on your viewpoint, there's not even a God figure.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is so central to Judaism. But at the end of the day, it's this experience of something greater than yourself, specifically the connection to it, that I think allows us to find common ground. And I don't have evidence of this. I'm sure I read this somewhere. I've come to believe that when the rabbis were rabbiing and getting all their stories together in the Talmud, there are all sorts of stories about how they went on ships. And I think they were going to places where they encountered Taoists and Buddhists and Hindus, and there was this inter-influence happening. So sure, we might not have changed the language.
Yeah.
You know, we might not have called it Taoism or any of the other Chinese or Indian specific things.
Right.
We were influenced by that and bringing it home and connecting them to the structures and processes and beliefs that we had back in Jerusalem and the Galilee. And I suspect the converse is true, though I've not done a deep enough dive to say that with as much certainty as I have the other way.
So I have a question for you. There's a line that keeps repeating in my brain. It's something like, go spread your seed and multiply. Who said that? I mean, I know it's like...
Okay, so I believe that brings us back to Genesis. And there are a few different versions of that. So the first one is Mil'u et haaretz v'kivshuha, fill the land and conquer it. And traditional rabbinic understanding of that is the world is ours. It's not ours to rape and pillage. It's ours to expand with and protect. A twin thing there. So that's one. That goes back to Genesis. I couldn't tell you which chapter. Like New York, where there's a city and a county and a state, Genesis is both a book and a portion within the book.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that's from Genesis qua the portion within the book. But then I think it comes up again in still Genesis. Be fruitful and multiply.
Right.
Is that one.
Right. Can I tell you this crazy theory? There is a theory that we human beings from different races come from different planets. Okay. Now, this is the interesting part, that the Jews come from a planet they are called Huvids. I think the planet is called something similar to Huvid, but the people from this planet are called Huvids. And they were sent to Earth because the Earth was a mess. And people were doing, they were involved in debauchery and just a crazy life. And why were the Huvids chosen? The Huvids were chosen. And this is like, so, one of the other lines that in terms of Judaism that always repeats itself to me is, we are the chosen people. Okay, now I always said, like, where does that line come from? And what did they actually mean by saying that? Apparently in this theory, the Huvids were chosen for a specific reason. They were chosen for their physical strength and they were chosen for their intelligence. Okay, so that could be a reason why that they're called the chosen people. But recently, this is an illustration to talk a little bit about the strength that can be witnessed in some Jewish lineage. Recently, the youngest person from Israel climbed Mount Everest. Do you know about this story?
Nope.
This was within the last year. And just as he got to be about 20 meters from the top, he saw somebody that he had hung out with on base camp or one of the places, and he was dying.
Mm.
He had taken off his headgear. He had taken off his gloves. He was dying. And he made a split-second decision to save that guy's life and go down the mountain, or go to the top. This guy would die, and he would be the first Israeli to reach the top of Mount Everest. And he chose to go down and save this guy's life. And this guy was, I don't know, he was not Jewish. He was, I don't know, you'd have to look it up. I remember somebody like maybe Pakistani, Indian, I don't know, somebody. This is a story you can look up. But what he had to do to get himself and this guy alive, because he was running out of oxygen, he had to ask people on the way up if they could have one breath of oxygen. Okay.
Wow.
Now, you try to ask a Chinese to ask for one breath of oxygen, he will never do it because he's polite. Okay. And he doesn't want to, a Japanese will never do that. He would rather die than to ask people along the way to give up their oxygen. But an Israeli can do it. Okay. And somehow he convinced them to give him one breath, and he got down and he saved this guy's life. He saved his own life. When I read that story, I was like, nobody else could have done it besides an Israeli or Jewish person, right? And so this is the kind of strength that I think that the chosen people were supposed to have had. Now, what happened deviated because according to this theory, the Huvids came down 3 times, once as Moses, once as Buddha, and once as Jesus Christ. Okay, so we're not just talking about the Middle East and the Levant. We're talking about the whole friggin' world.
Sure.
And so the first time was Moses, right? And Moses came down with the tablets, and, the whole Old Testament and New Testament fell into place for me, which never did before I heard this theory. So what happened was the Huvids came to this earth, but they didn't spread their seed widely. They were supposed to intermarry with all different kinds of races. The race that is living in China comes from a different planet than the race that lives in Tibet, according to this theory. And the race that comes from Tibet is very spiritual. They're not really concerned with material good. The richest person in Tibet, you have never seen his house on the internet because he doesn't have a house that looks that different from anybody else's, right? But you have seen plenty of other wealthy people from all over the world, right? And the Chinese, they are so good at developing material culture that they have the finest embroideries, the finest silks. They started the whole endeavor with porcelain, which the Koreans continued and perfected, on and on and on. We're not talking good, bad, and ugly. We're talking about difference. Okay.
Sure.
So what happened with the Huvids is that they intermarried, and there were other kinds of problems from intermarrying, as in the Appalachian population that intermarries, and they have other kinds of problems too, certain kind of problems too, right? Because I grew up in southern New Jersey, and not all, but I would say a large portion of my friends from New York and from New Jersey were Jewish. So, this has been a really interesting study. Like I've spent my life studying males. Okay, because I never had a brother. So I was like, what makes these people tick? And so, being married once and then not being married and then going out with different people and then being married again. It's just like something that you do unconsciously.
Sure.
And I've been also fascinated by what makes the Jewish culture so different or similar from the Chinese culture. And there are a lot of overlaps.
Yeah.
Education being one, the way of handling money, these kinds of things. So this is all part of my lifelong exploration. So there you have it.
It's a beautiful exploration, and I'm so glad you shared the Huvid story. I want to explore it some more. You asked, where did this notion of chosenness come from?
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's reference to it. It comes up in the 5th book of the Bible, which is essentially Moses' soliloquy towards the end of his life, where he talks about the Israelites being a chosen nation. I don't think Moses says exactly for what. And then it comes up again in the prophets. I want to say that it's Amos or Amos, but could have been any of the other ones. I honestly don't remember. So it's concept that comes up a lot, but I want to focus on the Hebrew for it. Hebrew is a root-based language, so the Hebrew for chosen is Bachar, Ha'am HaNivchar, the nation that is chosen. That connects me back to something else Moses says at the end of his life. He uses that same language of choice when he says, I place before you a blessing and a curse. Choose life, uvacharta b'chaim, that same language. The basic theory of how I learned to kind of explore Torah study is no word is unintentional. It's divine economy is, I think, the name of the theory in English. Mm-hmm. God intended for every word to be very intentional. And if Bachar appears here in Deuteronomy, where else does it appear and what's the relationship? You described yourself as a weirdo. I'm going to out myself as a weirdo right now. There's a book that I wish I had as a kid, because once I discovered it as an adult, I was like a kid in a candy store. I refer to it as the BDB. And it stands for the Brown Drivers Briggs Lexicon. And it takes every word, and if you take the 3-letter root, Bachar, Bet, Chet, Resh, it will tell you every time that root appears and in what form and give you the sources.
Yeah.
And so you get to do these beautiful intertextual studies.
Is that like an app?
It is a book. It's about 4 or 5 inches wide and 10 inches tall. But most importantly, if you go to Sfaria, S as in Sam, E, F as in Frank, ARIA.org, and you type in any verse in the Torah, we can look at 460 comments on this one verse. And the commentators range from the 8th century to probably, at least through the 19th. We can look at 28 times this verse is mentioned in the Talmud, 142 times it's mentioned in the Midrash, which is written at around the same time as the Talmud. It's kind of rabbinic imaginings that kind of close the gap. Halacha, Jewish law that involves this. But here's where I'm getting to this. I wanted to see more reference, right? If I click reference here, there it is, the BDB. So it's looking at the root of the word Elohim, which is one of the names of God. And you see this, like it's the massive exploration of where it comes up and its connection to the word pachad, which is fear. It's just, it's this endless intertextual love affair, which, by the way, that's what I'm doing in these songs, except that I'm adding a layer of music. My lyrics are a comment on the commentators and the text, and the music is a comment on the lyrics, and you end up with this multimedia presentation of one person's exploration of kind of divine texts. That's why I offer it to others, because you're going to have whatever reaction you're going to have, and your reaction alone, even if it's is still something that connects us.
Is that a Jewish word? No, I'm kidding. Remind me again, you did the lyrics first or the music first? You said you did the music first, right?
I mean, there were pieces. It started with a voice recording. I think the song, like the psalm, flits back and forth because God makes the fiery winds God's messengers. That's verse 4. God sets the rafters of God's lofts. The awkwardness is there is that Hebrew is a gendered language, and whenever I remember, I try to de-gender it. So you end up with God sets the rafters of God's lofts rather than his or her lofts. In the waters. What are the waters? Not the waters of the ocean, but the waters above the sky, according to the biblical story. So you water the mountains from your lofts. The earth is sated from the fruit of your work. It's this constant back and forth. And for what it's worth, by the way, this is a prayer that people who pray will say this at least once a week, and usually on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday morning, depending on your tradition. So you're immersing yourself in the creation story and doing it in this very kind of granular way.
Yeah, it's interesting. And who chose that to be I mean, who set that example? Would be interesting to know, right?
Set the example of
Of
choosing
of of
this.
choosing this particular piece of writing for a once a week,
I suspect that it comes from the canon that was set by the rabbis shortly after Jesus lived. Possibly
Yeah,
before, but at least shortly after.
that kind of stuff is actually fascinating, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The experience you talked about with art, I have it with art. I have it with music. I also have it with these texts. We talked before about you weren't sure you believed in the historicity, accuracy of the Bible, my language, not yours. And you know what? I'm not so sure I believe in that either. But what I do believe is that there's something divine in the text, and divine qua, how my brother says, isn't she divine? Right? My brother would meet you and he'd say, Emily, she's divine. Right? And
Yeah.
and he means that you're wonderful.
Yeah.
But like my kind of worldview, you are not only weird touched, but you're touched in a divine way. You're connected to something greater than yourself. That's what you do in your art. That's what you do by, without really knowing what was coming, diving into this conversation and just diving in deep.
That's a beautiful way to think. I think your brother's onto something because the language he's using reflects the interconnectedness of the present with something that's timeless, right?
Yes, exactly right. And so like when I hit these Psalms, I could write probably 40 songs, 50 songs from this Psalm alone. I have a full-time job and a family and other things to do. But if I were to retire tomorrow, I would kind of get through the 150 and then I'd cycle through it again or something.
You could because it's that rich.
Yeah, exactly.
Shep, you live an amazingly rich, you've created this amazingly rich world for yourself. I really admire that.
Thank you. And thank God I've been able to do that with whatever talents God gave me and those that I've kind of enriched. And most importantly, my wife and my law partners and my clients give me the space to do this. And thank God, like taking it to this next step, I know some fascinating people like you who are good at conversation and can have grand conversations about granular stuff. And so that's a gift too.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? It's not easy. I spent the evening last night with some friends. At the end of the night, I realized that I was actually really exhausted, but I also realized that I was kind of bored. And it's not an easy thing to admit because I love my friends dearly, but I was bored. And there are so few people who want to talk about the things that we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
We come across these ideas and these things that are so, I would say, big and haphazard in a way, because they're haphazard in that we were not taught this stuff. We were taught with a certain angle. You don't find it in the New York Times. You don't find it in the New York Review of Books. You're left with your own head scratching and you're left with like, gee, I wonder who I can ask this question. That is so rare to find somebody who can actually engage instead of thinking like, I got a phone call I got to make in 2 minutes,
Well, the other thing is that it's nice for me, and again, this goes to like my theology. I mean, if I ever move off the Psalms for songwriting inspiration, I'd probably move next to a book that is called The Ethics of Our Ancestors, and it's pithy little sayings from the rabbis 2,000 years ago. There's so much wordplay in it, and I love that stuff. One of them is Ehov es harav, love the rabbi, usna es harabanus, and hate the rabbinate. Now, the kind of normative meaning is probably be careful of government. Rav and Rabbanut also have other meanings. Love the Rav doesn't only have to mean the individual rabbi. It could mean love the many, right? Because Rav means a lot. And be suspicious of, I don't want to use the language of hate, but that's literally what it means. But be suspicious of organizations that control the many. So there's a potential political reading there. And there's also this idea that love the individual rabbi, but you you should be suspicious of their power in their authority as rabbis. That's an important aphorism for me because, I made the decision a few years before I met you not to complete rabbinical school. And I kind of stepped away from all of it, but found myself drawn back into it. And in doing so, what I discovered was that I love rabbis individually and plurally. But at the end of the day, whether it's a rabbi, an imam, or a priest, if we are relying on them to be our arbiters of that which is divine and what the divine says, we are failing. It is incumbent, from my perspective, kind of in the Jewish world, we need to dive into the text as a medium for engaging with the divine. And to the extent that you take halachic, Jewish legal observance seriously, well, then it's incumbent upon you to dive in with the Jewish legal texts. If at the end of the day you say, I don't really believe that the rabbis had all that, like, we've lost the divine, and it's my job to kind of unearth the divine through exploring the texts and talking to other people. Okay, well, then you're not going to explore the legal texts. You're going to explore everything else, the human connection. And that brings me back to one of the things earlier in our conversation. You talked about thinking about these important issues, but also I threw out there that you are not only thinking about them, you are doing the work. So would you tell me and whoever ends up listening to this about what you do outside of being an artist and a professor?
Yeah. So I'm a retired professor, but I have all these books that I start and that I push along, chapter by chapter. I'm reading a book now on the alchemy of art. I'm reading a book on, it's a fascinating book on comparing Buddhist sculptures. I'm reading a book on life on other planets. So I'm reading a lot of different things, right? And I just keep dipping in, and I'm an erratic meditator. But what I have found is that I think the older I get, the more involved in my intuition, the more I put faith in my intuition than anything else. So, I'm living in a small space. And so sometimes, like when people live too close together, they get kind of irritated with the humanness of each other, right? So, but when I have found that no matter what is going on in my life, all I have to do is go out and breathe the air. And when I feel the air against my face and I put it in my lungs, I feel the connection to the earth. It's the simplest thing that anybody could do. And yet our brains will run right over it. Our brains will go back. Well, yeah, but I feel and he said this and she said, but if you let all of that go and you let your brain go, then you are just left feeling like, hey, it's not bad to be alive. It's a nice feeling. And that's so important. So I think I've learned the very, very basics of connecting to our earth. And it seems to take a lifetime to do it. And some people are faster at it than others. I think I myself was quite slow. But when you grow up and I want to be a good kid. I want to please my parents. I want to please my teachers. I want to do well in college so that I could get a good job and pay my taxes. Like everything is prescribed to you by a group of institutions and a group of people who've been influenced by institutions, and they all want the best for you.
Right.
But they don't understand so much. And, I read this great quote the other day. You spend half your life learning things, and the second half of your life, you learn to unlearn that everything that you were taught is false, and you have to learn other things.
Right.
So that's where I am now. I understand that that's a process we go through.
Sure.
Some young people that I talk to, they get it right away. Like they don't need convincing. Other young people that I talk to, they're so invested with what they learn that I sound like I'm coming out of left field and they can't take it in. They cannot take it in unless they let go of something to create space.
Yeah.
To let something in.
To what extent did this unlearning phase that you are in now lead you to your work with IIRR? I don't remember what it stands for, but I know the work it does.
International Institute of Rural Reconstruction. It's really very simple. My grandfather was a founding member of the sister organization, Philippine Rural Reconstruction Management. And my uncle was on the board. My cousin is currently on the board. So when the president made a plea for new board members, I happened to be standing in the room, and I just thought, I've spent my life as an artist in my studio thinking about whatever it is I wanted to think about. Let me go out into the world a little bit more and work for people who might not have $39 a month to live on. And thought, we in New York, because it's a different country than the rest of America. No, I'm kidding. We in New York think, number one, that we're the center of the universe and that our problems are so big. And we think that our problems are the only problems. And artists are very self-absorbed, very self-absorbed. It's about my work, my career, my time, and how you're going to react to all of that. I wanted to expand my world a little bit. So I went from just being on the board to being a vice chair because the vice chair left the organization and she took me out for a drink and she said, I want you to be vice chair. And I said, what? Are you kidding me? I don't know anything about organizations. I've been in my studio for my whole life up until now. And she said, it's okay. I've been watching you. You're going to do fine. So that's how I got to be vice chair. And then the chairman resigned and there was nobody to take that role. So everybody said, okay, Emily, you're up. And I said, no way. I don't know anything. I did the same song and they didn't buy it. So I said, okay, I'll compromise and I'll become interim chair. And so that's what I am now.
So I'm going to quote ethics of our ancestors again. B'makom she'ein anashim, in a place where there are no people, hishtadel lihios ish, try to be a person, or find a way to be a person. And basically it's saying, if there's no rabbi in your town, as metaphor, then it's incumbent upon you to become the rabbi, educate yourself and others. And when you need help, you step in. And that's basically what you've done here. Reflecting back, that is an unlearning because you spent all those years in the studio and people were focused on your work. And of course, you were focused on giving them this thing that you created. And now you're focused on helping other people create structures for themselves. It's very different kind of modality than presenting works of art.
Yeah, but so I never really thought that I was giving people gifts when I was giving people gifts. I would say the first decade of my life, starting from like 21, I was really thinking about trying to figure out the world through my dyslexia. So I was thinking about right and left and binary oppositions. When my ex-husband and I separated, I was in a terrible state. I was just thinking about healing me. I was thinking about healing the heart and finding the center of myself. Of course, that translates to I'm making paintings about that and I give it to you and maybe you can find a connection to heal your own heart. Really, the reason for doing it was just to heal me.
Sure.
And then after a decade of that, I was flying to China to do this book. And somehow in the air, I realized that I had healed and that I was seeing the earth from afar. Of course, I was really still in the clouds, but in my mind, I was seeing the earth like from a spaceship, So the center became the world.
Oh, wow. How powerful.
And then that's what brought me into the universe.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for this very warm and wonderful conversation. And it's really great to be back in touch with you, Emily.
Yeah, I've totally enjoyed myself and enjoyed all the little nuggets that you opened up for us.
I'm so glad. Right back at you. Thanks so much for listening. Special thanks to Emily for joining me, to Emil Stern for his help in producing this episode, to Eros for his help producing the song in this episode, to Jessica Hanna-Sweedler for her help on social media, to Liat Silvera for designing the podcast logo, and to my wife Shari for the endless ways she supports me. You can find Unwrapping Heaven and all the other songs in this song cycle on most platforms that stream or download music, including Spotify and Apple. You can help the podcast by liking and subscribing and writing comments on all of your favorite platforms and on social media. In the next episode of The Rest is Commentary, I'll be talking with my friend and mentor, educator, activist, coach, Shoshana Bloom. We discuss different approaches to leadership, how the term leadership is overused and can be off-putting, the downsides of being a perfectionist, the symbiosis between a performer and their audience, and individuals in leadership roles with others among their constituents, the importance of shared language and stories, and so much more, all inspired by Shosha's thoughts after listening to It's About What You Do, inspired by Psalm 82 and written by Liz Hanlon and me. Please join us.